Our project that we first did with Newgen was for our combined records organization in the Division of Prisons, for the Department of Correction, for the Department of Public Safety. Most people don't know what combined records is, so I'm going to take a minute just to kind of walk you through that, and hopefully it won't take too long. But basically, the mission of combined records organization is to maintain a unified inmate file for all offenses for all inmates consistent with statutory requirements and record retention policies. And when I say maintain an inmate file, I mean literally an inmate file. This is what an inmate file can look like. It can have as little as one sheet of paper in here, which could be the judge's order allowing us to incarcerate an offender, or we've actually got inmate files that take up an entire drawer of a 5-drawer file cabinet. We have some folks who've been in there for a while. The files that are maintained on site at our facility, we've got over 37,000 active inmates, as well as, because we have a recidivism rate, unfortunately, that runs in the probably 40% range over a 3-year period, we basically keep 2 years' worth of inmates who've already been released. Otherwise, the people who run the state archives throw things at us when we go out to get the files back, because they're used to having people give them stuff, not send stuff back. As I said before, we've got 5-drawer file cabinets, but we have 350 of them, roughly somewhere between 6.5, 7 million pages. And the good news is that if somebody manages to stay out of trouble and off of supervision and out of prison for 10 years, then once it goes to the state archives after 10 years, it does actually get purged and destroyed. To give you some idea physically of what we're talking about, that's about as good a picture as I could take with my smartphone. Wow, it looks even bigger on that screen up there. But those are the 5-drawer file cabinets I was talking about, and it does take up quite a bit of space. You'll notice sitting right over all of those file cabinets are the I don't see them here, but the fire yeah, the sprinkler heads up there. And we've actually debated whether it would be worse to have a fire in there or whether it would be worse to have the water come pouring out. But either way, interestingly enough, the business case that really drove this, I mean, there's lots of costs and savings and things like that that you can demonstrate. But I'm convinced that what really drove the business case for this is that two springs ago in Raleigh, we had a series of tornadoes that moved through, and a building about 100 yards east of our building is a home improvement warehouse. Not one of the stores, you know, Home Depot or Lowe's or anything like that, but one of the warehouses that actually supply those stores. The tornado basically tore that building apart, flattened it, and for the next, I would guess, couple of weeks, anywhere you drove around the country, you would just drive and see pieces of pink insulation anywhere that you drove around. I had a discussion with our senior management and said, you know, if that tornado had been about 100 yards to the west, instead of seeing pink insulation, you'd be seeing these all over the county. And so about 4 years after we first put in for the funding for the project, we actually wound up getting funding for the project. And we had to put in the other business case, like we could recover leased office space. Had an interesting conversation with someone last night at dinner who was saying that they were at a location where there were birth and death records that were being kept, and they were being stored in trash cans. I'm sorry, not trash cans, trash bags, and that they were literally disintegrating within the trash bags. And that was the same thing that's happening with our records. You know, if you have an inmate that's been in since 1974, 1975, anything that's been printed on thermal paper, anything that's been typed, anything like that is just going to continue to deteriorate. Well, once it gets scanned, that deterioration stops. And in a lot of cases, what we've found is that using the software and the scanning hardware, we're actually able to get better images once it's been scanned than is actually on the paper, which is a real testament to the software. Then we've got reduced time to access the documents, and then most importantly, reduced incidence of lost and misfiled documents. In summary, what the project scope was we basically addressed two phases. The first was what we called our Day Forward Scanning project. Now, this was not a pilot. We made it very clear that what we wanted was a fully operational system that we could use for any new inmates that came in once the project completed. So as inmates came in, we didn't start a paper file. We basically took the paper, the judge's order, scanned it, any associated files with that. If they were a returning inmate, we took their file, scanned all that in, and then on a go-forward basis, scanned everything that came in associated with them. So we weren't piloting this. We made it clear when the vendor left, the vendor being Newgen, that we wanted a fully operational system, but that we were only going to be using it on a day-forward basis. Then as a second project, then we were going to have to deal with those 350 file cabinets that you saw on the earlier slide. So we issued the RFP, made the award, did the business analysis, the design, the implementation. I'll talk about this later in terms of things that went well, but the business analysis went extremely well. The Newgen folks that came in really worked hard to understand our business and not just simply ask us, what do you want to do? They understood our business well enough to make recommendations so that we could actually make improvements to our process instead of just simply automating our process. Then after the implementation, there was a burn-in period. There's always going to be some minor modifications and user acceptance. Once that was completed, then we issued an IFB, which is an invitation for bid for a series of pre-qualified vendors to come in and do the scanning for those 350 file cabinets. The process we went through was the vendor came in, basically took 10 file cabinets a week off-site every Wednesday. The following Wednesday, they'd bring the information back, give it to us to load into the development system for QA, and while they were there, they'd take another 10 file cabinets off. And we're actually within, I think, a week. Is that right, Michael? Yesterday. Okay, so this week we're finishing up our last batch of 10 file cabinets. We could have done more. The vendor was certainly capable of doing more, but we were really constrained by our own staff time because, as I'll mention in a future slide, there is a substantial trade-off between document preparation and document retrieval. It is very time-consuming to do document preparation, as anybody in here who's done a project knows. So really, what we were constrained by was the document preparation time and then the availability of our staff to do the QA as it came back in. We really didn't want to get too far behind. Well, we couldn't get behind on the QA, and we didn't want to get too far behind on the, we couldn't get behind on the document preparation, or the vendor couldn't do their job, and we didn't want to get too far behind on the QA, or we couldn't do our job. So lessons learned to apply to future projects. One, spend the time up front to understand your business. Don't just automate existing processes. You're more than likely going to just be able to make errors faster than you can do manually, because you can always make errors faster in an automated system than you can in a manual system. The other thing is you really need to understand, and this was really brought home to us because we were sort of ignorant about this, is you really need to understand whether you're dealing with a document-based or a forms-based environment. With our inmate files, there's all sorts of stuff in here. There's everything from court documents to victim letters to things that are written, handwritten by inmates using pencils, pens, crayons, you name it. And so we didn't have the luxury of using forms that have OCR and dates and signatures that are always in the same place, always in the same location. And so in some ways it made it easier because we basically just ran them through the scanner. In some ways, from a retrieval standpoint, it made it more difficult. Second, excuse me. Second thing, to the extent possible, get buy-in from all of the stakeholders up front. Change is difficult. People resist change. People resist change in different ways. So to the extent that you can get your buy-in up front, your project is going to be much more successful. As I said before, there is a trade-off between document preparation and retrieval time that can significantly affect your project duration and cost. We basically chose to spend an awful lot of time on document preparation. It really impacted the day-to-day operations of the Combined Records organization, but it absolutely paid off in the end. And then, but next, be realistic. You need to be realistic about, in this case, particularly what your staff can accomplish in-house and what you really need the vendor to do. If you say, I want to be able to complete the project, in our case, for example, say by Thanksgiving, that simply wasn't going to happen given the levels and the speed with which our staff could do document preparation. You can wish it, but that isn't going to make it so. So you need to be realistic. Do you need outside help? Can you afford outside help? What are you capable of doing, and where do you need the vendor to step in and step up? And then finally, and this you could put on any slide that talks about any project, about anything, communicate, communicate, communicate. One of the things that we saw with stakeholders, people who are consumers of the information, as well as people who were preparers of the information, was they really didn't understand the first time we went through it with them. Staff were very concerned. Here's this new piece of equipment, here's this software I'm hearing great things about. Does this mean I'm going to lose my job? No, it doesn't mean you're going to lose your job. It means that you probably got twice as much work to do. But it's really important to understand where the pain points are of whoever your stakeholders are, and then communicate the heck out of it with them, because I guarantee you they won't get it the first time. Probably won't get it the second time. So anyway, we've been very pleased at the Department of Public Safety. We have adopted Newgen as our enterprise document management system. When we put out the RFP, we said we're starting with one organization, but our vision is that this is going to go across the organization organically. One of the first thing that we really intend to do is we already have two very, very capable case management systems, one for our adult offenders who are either in prison or on probation or parole. The other case management system is for our juvenile. They hate it when I call them offenders, but they're not here now, so juvenile offenders. And so we've got two case management systems, so we're not really looking for this system to replace that. What we're going to try and do is basically integrate the images that used to be in here so that you can access them directly from our case management systems without having to log out of the case management system, log into the electronic document management system, and then log back out and get back into the case management system. We basically want to have one integrated environment. I think we're going to be able to do that working with Newgen. Their product seems to be very capable in terms of APIs and open integration with other systems, and that's really going to be our next initiative. Then we're going to move on to the juvenile justice policies. That's a relatively small effort because it's really not going to address juvenile justice information. And so that reduces some of the privacy issues associated with juvenile documents and juvenile information. The next one, our human resources folks are just chomping at the bit. We have been trying to hold them off gently because they've got a much more complex environment than the Combined Records document or than the Combined Records organization has. They not only have existing systems, 2 electronic systems that are already in place, but they've also got tons of paper documents as well. They've also got a lot more workflow and OCR and a lot of things that we didn't have to deal with the Combined Records project. So that one's going to be a fairly substantial project, and we're going to have to figure out how we're going to address that. And then behind them, our purchasing organization, our procurement, our fiscal organization, and then health records, which I'm guessing everyone in the room is going to have to deal with at some point or another. So with that, didn't quite get us to 1:40, but I'm not sure if, Ken, you tell me, do we have time for questions, or do we want to try and get us back on schedule? Sir. In terms of like time to retrieve and things like that, the approach we're taking is actually very different. So it's difficult to. We'd almost be the metrics would be apples and oranges, because the process that used to be was the consumers of the information would actually come to Combined Records and say, go pull that file for me. And they'd have to go pull the file and retrieve it, and then either within our building or send it to a separate building, or send it out to a prison facility or something like that. Whereas now they're actually able to bring the information up when they want it by searching out in the offender's unique identifier number, and they can bring it up and look at it, assuming that they've got the appropriate security levels. So the short answer, no. The longer answer, even if we did, it really wouldn't be comparing things that are comparable.